you have read here in the chapters, chapter 12, 13, and 14 on punctuation, right? Those rules that Ms. Worrell went over with you the other day. I sent you a worksheet. I'm going to kind of race through these two worksheets on Blackboard today so that I just make sure that I'm reinforcing with you the rules that you need to be, operating by, so that when you get into the exam, sure, punctuation is a factor, but punctuation is a factor because it helps us control grammar. So when we need to go back to those 4 major errors rules, right? So that's going to be another factor for this exam on Friday. The exam is going to cover the 4 major errors, it's going to cover punctuation, and it's going to cover what we're going to talk about today, secondary grammar rules as well. On Wednesday, I'm going to come down there and I'm going to give you guys kind of a little practice test. We can run through a little practice test and I can show you what we're going to be looking for and how you need to go about, reading these passages for these grammar errors so that we know how to correct them, and how, it's because it doesn't do us any good to know how to correct them if we can't find them. So we got to find them first, and then once you identify them, then we go and we do the correcting. So the major issues that I have I'm going to put up my my computer screen so that this is the document that's on Blackboard. Everybody, everybody see those rules on there?
Yeah.
All right, great. So we need to make sure we cover a couple of things, because if we don't understand how to use semicolons and how to use colons, then we're going to make some grammar errors, because we need to conceptualize this. Whenever you see a semicolon or a colon, you need to be thinking that that is a terminal mark of punctuation, just like a period, right? Except they function in 2 different ways. A semicolon separates 2 independent clauses. So if I've got a short independent clause here, I finished my exam early, and I've got another independent clause here, it was easy, that semicolon can separate those 2 independent clauses. I can do the same thing with the transitional, or what we call conjunctive adverbs, right? Where I have my independent clause here, and then my other independent clause here, but I use a transitional word to connect them together. The point is that I'm still joining together independent clauses, and I'm using the semicolon to do it to show that they're closely related, all right? So the rule of semicolon usage is that you've got to have 2 independent clauses on both sides of it, or you're not dealing with a semicolon anymore. Now, there's rule number 3 here, where we have these internal marks of punctuation. Look, this is really kind of, more advanced, complicated writing when we have lists and we have items in series. So when we have punctuation inside of the list, so if I've got 3 cities on here, Niagara Falls, New York, Niagara Falls, Ontario, and then Niagara Lake, Ontario, I've got 3 cities and states or provinces, and then I've got commas inside because I've got to separate my city from my state with the comma as well, right? In this situation, if I put commas here between the items in series, I might be creating confusion, because someone might think it's Niagara Falls and New York City or something like that. So when you have items in series and you have internal punctuation in those items in series, we use the semicolon to separate the items in series. I'm not going to test you on that. I'm not going to make your sentence structure that complicated. I just want you to know that there's more than just one reason to use a semicolon. It does separate items in series it does separate independent clauses like rules 1 and 2 state, but there's also these rules down here, 3 and 4, which are for more complicated punctuation structures, okay? So those are out there. Just know that they're out there, but we're going to be worried about semicolons joining together independent clauses. Colons now are marks of punctuation that end a sentence, right? So just like a semicolon, a colon is a terminal mark of punctuation. It ends a sentence. What's unique about a colon is that it can introduce anything. In other words, after that colon, you could have one word, you could have a fragment, you could have a list of things, or you could have a complete sentence. It doesn't matter. The factor about the colon is that it's used to end a sentence and then tell us, that something else is coming that's going to clarify what we're talking about. So in this situation right here, many people are going to get this this type of problem, like I'll probably put this on the exam, where you're going to see a sentence, and it's not going to be a complete sentence. What there's going to be here is a list, but that list can't be there with a colon unless I've got a complete sentence in front of it. So if you're looking at this sentence right here, the gift basket was filled with, that's not a complete sentence. I cannot put that colon there. That's what makes this one incorrect. But if I complete that sentence, the gift basket was filled with the following, now my sentence is complete. Now I can put that colon there, and I can put whatever I want after that colon. That's the rule of colon usage. You really need to know that it's just like a semicolon in that it ends a sentence. A semicolon then brings on a new sentence. A colon brings on a word, a list, or fragment, or whatever else you want after it. Okay? So that's the difference between a colon and a semicolon. Here's the example I was just talking about, right? We could perform only one procedure. That's a complete sentence. And then we have this two-word explanation, radical surgery. So I put my colon there because radical surgery is just telling me what that one procedure is. I'm just clarifying what this means. You could also do a complete sentence. We're probably not going to be doing that. The other thing that you're going to need to know, and this is for the purpose of writing papers, for when we're using quotes and we're looking at the information in our stories in order to, and our research to help us make our arguments. The other rule of colon usage you're going to need to know is this one. Whenever you have a quote that you're from your story or from your research, if you use a complete sentence to introduce that quote, you need a colon there. Most of you are used to the rules of comma usage, which we'll cover in just a second, where we do something like Jones recommends, comma, and then we go right into our quote, right? Well, if we use a Jones recommends, that's not a complete sentence, so I can do a comma there. But since I do have a complete second sentence here, Jones recommends that we use 3 procedures, now I put that colon in there in order to introduce my quote. So we'll talk about the rules of comma usage as they apply here, so it'll be more meaningful to you as time goes on. All right, these other rules of semicolon use or colon usage, obviously you know those. All right, rules of comma usage. We need to box things up into sets. Comma usage is pretty easy to understand if you start thinking about things in terms of independent clauses. You all know what an independent clause is. What you really need to know is if there's information operating either within that independent clause or in front of it, then we need to start employing comma rules. So if we have anything that is 2 independent clauses, we know, right, this rule right here, comma coordinating conjunction, we've got an independent clause here, we've got an independent clause here. Those 2 sentences are separated with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. I could put a semicolon in there, or I could put a period and a capital letter in there. Those are the only 3 ways that you can join independent clauses together. Right? So everybody sees that. So that rule we've been talking about since day 1. The other thing you need to look at is introductory phrases and clauses. So anything that comes in front of an independent clause. So if you know where your sentence is, your independent clause is, if something is in front of it, you need to set it off with a comma. So it could be a long prepositional phrase. It could be a dependent clause. It could be this participial phrase, right? I mean, there's a bunch of different things that we can use. I'm just saying, if you've got anything in front of that independent clause, right? Here's my independent clause. I realized that I couldn't afford it. Try performing this test. These are all independent clauses. This right here is stuff that's in front of it. So if I've got a phrase or a clause or even a word like however or additionally or consequently, right? Those words are introductory elements, get a comma in there. The only other factor that I wanted you to see here was that we have gerunds, right? Now a gerund is an ing word that looks like a verb, but it acts as a noun. Because it acts as a noun, this is the independent clause. So seeing the starving people encouraged many to move their families out of Ireland. So seeing is my subject, encourage is my verb, this is my independent clause. I have no rule of comma usage that says anything about separating subjects from verbs or anything that goes inside my independent clause. It's only when things are introductory in nature or what you're going to find out non-essential elements. All right. So here's my introductory words like however and consequently, initially, any of those words, anything that comes in front of that independent clause. Look at this. Initially, the group protested. Here's my independent clause. Consequently, they revisited the issue. There's my independent clause. Initially is an introductory word. Consequently is an introductory word. So I'm going to use commas there, but I'm also going to do a comma with a coordinating conjunction because I have two independent clauses in that sentence, right? Because I have two independent clauses, I've got to do the comma coordinating conjunction. All right. The other rules, pretty simple. If you have items in series, milk, bread, and eggs, I've got to have a comma to separate the items in series. We talked about that one already. Coordinate modifiers, this is a pretty simple test, right? Whenever we have two words that are describing the third word, all we do is we take these two words, we reverse the order of them, and we put the word and in. If I can read this smoothly, then this means that these coordinators are these modifiers are coordinate, and I just put a comma in there. So I could say the smooth and clear finish of the table, that makes sense, comma belongs. If I were to do something like the wet tennis court was slippery, I couldn't reverse the order and put and between them. I couldn't say the tennis and wet court was slippery. It doesn't make any sense. So tennis and wet aren't coordinate modifiers. That's why I can't put commas in there. All right. The other rule that I want you to pay attention to, and here, just as we had this big group of introductory elements, right? Introductory phrases, introductory dependent clauses. Well, now we've got a bunch of rules for non-restrictive phrases and clauses. So now a non-restrictive element means it's something that's in the sentence that doesn't need to be in the sentence in order for the sentence to make sense. Another way of hearing this is non-essential. So you could have essential elements and non-essential elements, or restrictive and non-restrictive. They're the same thing. So in this situation right here, I'm saying the registrar is my subject, is not in her office. And oh, by the way, she's the one who had to give me my schedule. So notice that this group of words who had to give me my schedule is set off with commas because it's interrupting my independent clause. I've got my independent clause here and that non-essential element coming in the middle, meaning that I don't need it in order for the sentence to make sense. I use that non-essential element with commas. And I do it with different types of phrases too. So my sentence is Michael's car will receive a ticket. Oh, by the way, it's parked on the street. Janelle provided me with several examples. Oh, by the way, she was the co-author of this chapter, right? And the same thing really applies to things like parenthetic events, right? Terraforming Mars, I am convinced, is necessary. Or I could say, this example, consequently, is a poor one. Anytime I interrupt that independent clause, anytime I put something in the middle of my independent clause that's not important, I've got to set that information off with commas. We also have comparative contrastive situations. This is pretty straightforward. Direct address and interjections, we're not talking, so we don't even have to worry about these rules unless we're transcribing speech. So these two, not concerning. What I am concerned about is this one right here. Here's the direct quote. If I'm bringing in a quote, right, where I've got a complete sentence in my quote and I've got an incomplete sentence introducing it, I have to use the comma. So think about that in terms of the colon. When I use the colon to introduce the quote, it's because I had a complete sentence in front of it. When I use the comma, it means that I have a partial sentence. Questions, addresses, dates, and all of that, we know all of that stuff. So those aren't really, too problematic. What I want to do is I want to look at these examples right here, and I want to walk through these with you so that you know how to apply the rules. So take a look at this example right here. Slee Hall, the recently completed fine arts building, is acoustically perfect. Obviously, the recently completed fine arts building is not essential to the sentence. My sentence is that Slee Hall is acoustically perfect. The fact that it's recently completed and the fact that it's a building of some kind, inconsequential, so I put commas around hall or after hall and after building. Does everybody see that? Okay, good. In this example right here, the toy that I wanted to buy is no longer available. In this sentence, there's no comma necessary because this clause right here that I wanted to buy is essential, right? I can't say that the toy is no longer available, right? I'm saying the toy that I wanted to buy is no longer available. Therefore, because I need to know this information, this is essential, I can't put commas around it. This one right here, Dr. Jones decided, however, that this procedure was best. I'm going to put commas around however, right? Because that's one of those parenthetic words. It's an interruption to my independent clause. Or how about this one? The Genesee River, which flows north into Lake Ontario, flows through the city of Rochester and is used to make beer. So in this situation, the Genesee River, there's my subject, flows through the city of Rochester, that's my independent clause. Oh, which flows north into Lake Ontario, incidental information, not required. I put commas around it to establish my non-essential element. How come I don't put a comma after Rochester? Anybody want to explain that? Say that again. There's no state? No, well, it's not that. Here's the issue. Look what follows it. And, right? If you see comma coordinating conjunction, you should be thinking of two things. One would be items in series, which would be I went to the store and bought milk, bread, and eggs, or I would be separating two independent clauses. I'm not separating clauses, and I don't have items in series here. Does everybody see that? This is really important because you're going to see this in a test. I'm going to be filling your sentences with these types of examples where I'm going to expect as soon as you see that coordinating conjunction, I want you to be looking to the left and saying, is that an independent clause? Yes. I want you to look to the right and say, is that an independent clause? And you're going to say, no, no commas necessary before and. Everybody with me on that? I need you to know this, right? Because this is what you're going to be tested on. By the way, the test on Friday is going to be an open book test, right? You can use your notes, you can use your books, you can use whatever you want. I don't care. And you can have as much time as you want to do this as well. The timing doesn't matter either. I just want you to sit down in class on Friday, start your test, and then if you need to take it with you or do whatever, that's great. I'll send the test to Ms. Worrell and she can print it off for you. But essentially what I want you to do is I just want you to type up that test and send it to me with your corrections, and then I'll be able to evaluate it. Any questions? Yeah.
So when is test going to be due then?
Well, I will say, what would be reasonable? Do you guys want to turn it in on Saturday morning? Do you want to turn it in to me? I want to have it done before the weekend, right? So you want to make it like, I mean, if I give you the Saturday, will you work on it on Saturday, or are you just going to blow it off? I guess that's my question. Well, I heard mutterings. What? Let me put my camera up so you can see me. Do you guys see me? Yeah? All right. Yeah, if you want till like what, 5 o'clock on Saturday, will that be helpful? Yeah. 8 o'clock. If I get it on Saturday at some point in time, great. I just want to have Sunday to grade it so I can send it back to you, okay? So if I get it sometime on Saturday, but we're going to start it together in class on Friday so that if you have any questions or concerns about what you're supposed to do, we can answer those questions, all right? So because if you think about it, the open bookness of this is, you're not going to write a paper without having access to your books, right? You're not going to write in any situation where you're not going to be able to look this stuff up. So I suggest that you have your book, have your notes, do whatever you need to do to look this up. The only thing I ask is that you just don't use another person to help you, right? Just make sure you can do this on your own. Any questions about what we're going to be doing? All right, let's go back to the worksheet. So here's the last of the issues here, right? Let's skip down to these. These examples right here, I want you to see introductory elements, right? So here, starting off this sentence, as my fishing line tightened, the reel began to scream. That is an introductory dependent clause, right? My fishing reel or my fishing line tightened, there's a subject and a verb, but it can't stand on its own because of as. So the reel began to scream is my independent clause. Therefore, we've got to put that comma there after tightened. Everybody can see that, right? Introductory element. If it's in front of that independent clause, get that comma in there. How about this sentence? Having changed her major, Kara had to enroll in biochemistry. Obviously, the comma goes after major because this group of words is in front of my independent clause. Number 3, consequently, she now has time to meet me for lunch. Obviously, it's after consequently because she now has time to meet me for lunch is my independent clause. Notice in this example, this one does not take commas because it's a gerund. Changing her major has been a positive experience for her, right? Changing is, there's my subject, has been is my verb. I don't have any reason to separate subjects from verbs, so putting a comma after major would be incorrect. When she was in high school, she did not know a career path she should choose. Obviously, the comma goes after school. To gain a full understanding of the program, Kara met with faculty members, comma after program. So anytime you see a phrase, a clause, or a word in front of your independent clause, you need to get that comma in there. These examples up here were about essentialness and non-essentialness, right? So if you get my drift, I'm going to be testing that essentialness and introductory elements to see if you know what you're talking about. All right, I want to show you some other issues in here as well. In addition to major grammatical errors, which are subject-verb disagreements, comma splices, and sentence fragments, right? And run-on sentences. So comma splices, run-on sentences, subject-verb disagreements, those 4 major errors. Did I get them all? Comma splice, sentence fragment, run-on sentence, and subject-verb, right? Those 4 major grammatical errors you're going to have to be aware of. There's also what we call secondary grammar errors. These things are problems, but they're not such problems that they would make your reader like lose track of what you're trying to communicate. One of the problems that we're going to see in here is an agreement between pronouns and their antecedents. What is an antecedent, right? Well, a pronoun, first of all, is a word that takes the place of a noun. Words like he, she, it, right? And antecedent would be the thing that it represents. So if it's talking about, if I use a pronoun she, I might be talking about Shay. So there's my antecedent. What we see all the time is that people don't understand that certain words are singular in nature. So in this sentence right here, it says each of the girls is it her or is it their own desk? And you may be thinking to yourself, well, girls, there's more than one, so I'd have to say it's their desk. That's not right. Here's the reason why, right? We have a bunch of words right down here. Each, every, nobody, all these words that are right down here on this list, all of those words are singular in nature. So if these are the subject of your sentence, which this is, right, I need to make my pronoun agree with that. How do I know girls isn't going to be part of the conversation? Because it's that prepositional phrase. Just like we looked at when we were looking at subject-verb disagreement, we're looking also to make sure that the pronouns agree with the nouns too, right? So if I have each, then I have, the girls doesn't matter. Each is singular. Each one has her own desk. That's what you need to be seeing, okay? So whenever I see everyone, I'm thinking one, right? One person is required to bring his or her. Neither, just because I've got men down here doesn't matter because this is prepositional phrase. I know that neither is on my list of singular pronouns, so I have to say neither one has his book. Okay? That is a pretty important issue. There's something else that we probably need to talk about too, and that is, this whole idea of using pronouns to start sentences. Whenever we start sentences, we need to make sure that our pronoun has a clear antecedent, has a clear reference to it. A lot of times students will have a really complicated concept that they're talking about, and then they'll write a sentence saying, this means such and such. Well, if you just got done talking about a really complicated concept, and then you throw out the word this, well, how am I supposed to know what element of the complicated concept you were just talking about? You need to clarify that. So if I'm down here, let's take an example right here. She talked endlessly about the operation, all right? So that's an independent clause. And then I say this blathering was boring, right? Because I'd have to clarify what this means. I can't just say she talked endlessly about the operations monotonous procedure and this was boring, because I wouldn't know if her talking endlessly or the monotonous procedure was the boring part. Right? There's 2 possibilities. It could be you're talking endlessly. It could be the monotonous procedure. So we clarify that and say, She talked endlessly, and this blathering was boring, right? I clarify what the pronoun means. I'm starting an independent clause with a pronoun. I'm making sure that I have a clear reference to what that means. Same thing happens here. When a woman marries, you take on responsibilities. Well, I'm not a woman, so that doesn't make sense, obviously, right? How about this one? When a student plans for college, it's a student. Now look at this. They struggle. This is the one where you are going to make mistakes, right? I'm going to put this in your exam where I'm going to have in the dependent clause or in the introductory element a singular pronoun, and then I'm going to throw that plural pronoun in the independent clause, and you need to be able to catch that. You need to be able to know that if it's only one student here, then it's got to be a he or a she there. You following me on this? Pronouns are troublesome areas. Keep your eyes out, making sure that you know what pronouns, if pronouns are singular or plural, and that you know that they mean something, right? They have to apply to something. All right, here's another issue that you need to be on the lookout for. This is something called a dangling modifier. A dangling modifier means that we've got a modifier that's in the form of a phrase. So here in this sentence right here, walking down the street, this is what we call an adjective phrase. It's describing the subject of my sentence. So you may read the sentence and say, walking down the street, my ticket appeared in the gutter. Oh, that makes sense. No, it doesn't. And here's the reason why. This group of words, walking down the street, is supposed to describe the subject of the sentence. The subject of the sentence is my ticket. So you can't tell me that your ticket was walking down the street. That's what the sentence does, right? So this modifier right here is not appropriately describing the subject of the sentence. Therefore, we call this a dangling modifier because it tells me that it's describing something and then it doesn't do its job. So that dangling modifier can be corrected by doing this. Walking down the street, you have to ask yourself, who was doing the walking? I was. I found my ticket in the gutter. So I look at the sentence right here and I say, at the age of 2, my uncle took me for a plane ride, right? Well, you're thinking to yourself, I was 2 years old when my uncle took me up, but the sentence actually says that your uncle was 2 years old and flying planes. Doesn't make any sense. How about this one? Hearing the alarm, you have to ask yourself, who's doing the hearing? You're saying that the hospital's hallways were. You can't misdirect your reader. So, dangling modifiers. All I'm asking you to do is look at those introductory phrases. If you see an introductory phrase, you need to ask yourself, is this thing doing its job by describing that subject of the sentence? All right? You keep your eyes out for that. You should be in good shape. The last thing I want to talk to you today is about parallel structure. Whenever you have items in series or items in coordination with each other, they have to serve the same grammatical function. In other words, we'll do something like this. I'll write a sentence that says, at camp, our students like to do 2 things, right? So I have to say our students like to bike and our students like to fish. In both of these situations, I use the words that are in coordination with each other or in series, and I link them against this one word right here. So our students like to bike, our students like to fish. That's my trigger word. So whenever you have items in series or items in coordination, there has to be one word that those 2 or 3 items link to. If you take a look at this sentence down here, right, you say, at camp, our students like fishing and to bike, and I'm going to say, all right, well, is that parallel? Well, let's go to our point. Our students like fishing. That's a sentence. Our students like to bike. Yeah, they don't serve the same grammatical function, but it makes them kind of awkward. So what we should do here is we should say our students like fishing and biking, or our students like to fish and to bike. Parallel structure means that they're serving the same grammatical function, right? So find the repeatable words in each of these situations, like the 2 and the 2, in order to make items in the series or items in coordination parallel with each other. So if I take a look at my examples down here, right? I write, the instructor wants to meet those students who play rugby and organize a team. Well, if you think about this, I could really get confused because I could say that my instructor wants to organize a team, or he wants to meet students who will organize a team. Because of the failure to repeat, right, I now am confused as to who's doing the organizing. So the instructor wants to meet those students and the instructor wants to organize. If I want to put this responsibility on the students, then I'm going to say the instructor wants to meet those students who play rugby and who want to organize a team, right? And either one of those would be correct, except it changes the meaning. The locus of responsibility is either on the students or it's on the instructor. You need to figure that out. You need to make sure you're keeping it focused. All right, I'm going to scramble down to here then, parallel structure issues. Parallel structure in these sentences, if you take a look at this, here's an example of how you need to be thinking. I've got to find my jumping off point, right? So I have an apple and pear. Does that make sense? Well, you may think it does, but you've got to read it against a word. So can I read it against an? I have an apple. I have an pear. No, I can't do that. So can I write, I have an apple. I have pear. I can't do that either. So what I have to do is I have to make it parallel by having an article in front of each of the nouns. I have an apple and a pear, so that I can say I have an, I have a, and I've got my sentence correct. Does everybody see that? Read it against the jumping off point, right? The trigger word is have. I have an apple and I have a pear. Read it against the single word. I can skip down to this one right here because this is more important. I am hot, tired, and I wish I had something cool to drink. You tell me, is that sentence correct?
Yes.
All right. So did you read it against the trigger word? Is there a word in there that triggers it? What's the trigger word? What's the word that you have to jump off for each of the items in the series?
I am.
Am, right. So you'd have to say, I am hot, I am tired, I wish. Does that make sense? Nope, can't do it. So what I'd have to do is I would have to say, I am hot and tired, and make that an independent clause, use my comma coordinating conjunction to join together the two independent clauses, and then say, I wish I had something cool to drink. Or I would have to say, I am hot, I am tired, and I am wishing I had something cool to drink. I don't know, it doesn't sound very good. But my point is that you've got to find the trigger word, right? This is not correct the way it's written because it doesn't read smoothly against the jumping off point, the trigger word. You've got to have all the items in this series or in coordination with each other, whether you've got 2 or 3 or whatever, right? You've got to hold those all up against that one word. So this is not correct because I cannot say I am hot, I am tired, I wish. Everybody see that? All right, so on Wednesday, I'm coming to town, right? And I'm going to bring some example test in, and we're going to walk through it sentence by sentence, and we're going to be looking for all these things. I need you to write this down, right? These are the things we're going to be testing on. I need you to know that we're working on 4 major errors, right? So primary grammar errors, the 4 major errors, and the secondary grammar errors like dangling modifiers, parallel structure, pronoun agreement. What was the other one I mentioned?
Punctuation.
What was it? Parallel structure, dangling modifiers, and pronoun agreement. Those were the things, right? Okay, so those 3 things in the secondary column, the 4 major errors in the primary column, the rules of punctuation, right? Commas, semicolons, and colons. You got to know how to use those. And that should be it. So primary errors, secondary errors, and rules of punctuation. So commas, semicolons, colons. So we're going to practice that on Wednesday. I'm going to come down there so we walk through it together because this television thing is driving me nuts. And then I'm going to come on Friday and we're going to hand out the test, and you can start it, you can ask questions, you can be prepared, but then you're going to go home and you're going to type that thing up. And if you want to have your computers in class on Friday, great. Ms. Worrell, I don't know if you want to go to the computer lab on Friday or not, but I'm just, you know, I'll go wherever you want to go. So.
Yeah, we'll be in the computer lab, guys.
Okay, so I plan on being there both Wednesday and Friday of this week. All right, and then we can make sure that we get this, get you guys situated in going in the right direction. Questions, comments, criticisms? Do you have any problems that you want to talk about before we move on?
Are we looking at?
Hold on a second. Sorry. Any questions about anything? You've got all the information. Look, having the information and having access to the information doesn't do you any good, right? Unless you are able to identify where the problems exist. If you don't recognize the problem areas, you're not going to make the appropriate changes to correct things. So you've got to practice. You've got to be reading through the exercises in the books. Look at how they're challenging you to make those decisions. I'll come there on Wednesday. You start asking all the questions you want, but I need everybody to do well on this midterm grammar exam because, you know, about half of you did well on the little practice grammar exam I gave you earlier. I need you to do a better job on this one. All right? Okay. See you on Wednesday, folks. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Guys, who wants to come next period to start?